Good Omens is about the apocalypse and the effect of its imminence on those aware of it. However, instead of being a traditional story about good triumphing over evil, Good Omens tells of humanity's triumph over the joint forces of heaven and hell as the apocalypse is avoided. Good Omens is a comedic novel, and as such it manages to be light and cheerful while evoking questions about the biblical apocalypse, free will, fate, and many other subjects. The central story of Good Omens is the anticipation of the apocalypse, and given that topic, it is not unnatural that the central figures of the story are an angel, a demon, and the Antichrist alongside a plethora of other biblical characters. Generally, these characters behave according to the social norms of society, and this is especially true of Aziraphale and Crowley. The novel's authors, Pratchett and Gaiman, portray them with human traits in order for the reader to accept them as the protagonists of the story. However, at the same time, it is also made clear that this is not normal behavior for angels and demons. One fundamental way in which this is achieved is through the idea of free will. Humanity differs from angels and demons in that they choose their own fate and are not governed by the will of God or Satan. Crowley and Aziraphale represent the exception to the rule since they have adopted free will from their 6,000 years of association with humanity. Thus, they have their own agenda, which is in line with that of humanity, not heaven or hell. Similarly, since Adam Young, the Antichrist, was brought up human with no angelic or demonic interference, he too has the power to choose his own fate and chooses to stay loyal to his adoptive kind. As the three of them turn their backs on heaven and hell and join forces with humanity against the apocalypse, the reader starts to see the main conflict of the story, the forces of heaven and hell together against humankind. Free will is the main distinction between humans and the other characters, namely the angels, demons, and the four riders of the apocalypse. Humans act of their own volition, whereas angels and demons have no free will. They are merely the tools of their superiors and exist only to spread their side's influence amongst humanity. This roughly corresponds with Crowley and Aziraphale, but although these functions are their central focus in the beginning of the novel, they also have personal aspirations. Aziraphale has maintained a secret identity as the owner of an old bookshop in Soho, and his book collecting hobby has resulted in a large collection of rare misinterpreted Bibles and works of prophecy. Similarly, Crowley is dedicated to his Bentley, which he has maintained without a scratch for 60 years, and his houseplants, which he frightens into submission, and which consequently are the most luxurious, verdant, and beautiful in London, and also the most terrified. He also vainly keeps up appearances by renewing his electronic equipment regularly because a sleek computer is the sort of thing that Crowley felt that the sort of human he tried to be would have. Crowley and Aziraphale thereby clearly show some evidence of having a free will to desire and want something that an angel or a demon otherwise would not. Comparing them to other angels and demons shows the extent they have deviated. Looking at Crowley's superiors and fellow demons, we can see that they become less and less empathetic the further away from humanity they are, culminating in those demons that only communicate with Crowley via the radio, presumably never having come in contact with real humans. An explanation for this is given in the novel, and it is that an aspect of humanity has rubbed off on Aziraphale and Crowley, thus making the angel less angelic and the demon less demonic. This then foreshadows the way they later distance themselves from heaven and hell and join forces with humanity. Comparably, Adam Young was raised as a human and has had no influences from either heaven or hell. Aziraphale and Crowley speculate early on in the novel what the Antichrist would be like if he had no satanic or angelic influences, and come to the conclusion that the child is angelic in the sense that so was his father when he was created. Saying he'll grow up to be a demon just because his dad became one is like saying a mouse with its tail cut off will give birth to tailless mice. The terms good and evil might not be apt to describe heaven and hell in Good Omens because, as mentioned, the agents of heaven and hell have no free will and therefore cannot be held accountable for the moral implications of their actions. It is even stated that hell wasn't a major reservoir of evil any more than heaven. In Crowley's opinion, they were just sides in the great cosmic chess game where you found the real McCoy, the real Grace, and the real heart-stopping evil was right inside the human mind. This, of course, negates the whole purpose of heaven and hell. Arguably, free will is the basis of ethics because without the capability to intend something to happen, a being cannot be held accountable for the consequences. Angels or demons are only able to influence people either way, but these influences come second to the benevolence and malevolence inherent in humanity itself. There's nothing hell can do to humanity that they don't do themselves, and just when you think they were more malignant than hell could be, they could occasionally show more grace than heaven ever dreamed of. It was this free will thing, of course, it was a bugger. The two sides of the conflict in Good Omens, humanity and the supernatural forces of heaven and hell, are distinguished by free will, a trait firmly rooted in humanity, and it is only by constant contact with humanity that supernatural beings such as Crowley, Aziraphale, and Adam have acquired it. They have stopped listening to what they should do and started doing what they want. Although Aziraphale and Crowley are not men, they have more in common with humanity than with heaven and hell at the conclusion of Good Omens. That's why they stand alongside humanity for a cause they feel is better than that which they are supposed to stand for. They transcend the boundary of unfamiliarity and become human enough for the reader to identify with them. Aziraphale and Crowley's development from servants of heaven and hell to independent beings is also the final stage in their developing of moral integrity. In the prologue of the novel, Aziraphale and Crowley are discussing the recent banishment of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Crowley played the part of the snake in the unfolding events, and afterwards is having doubts about the ethics of his actions, wondering whether the apple thing wasn't the right thing to do. At the same time, Aziraphale is contemplating his own actions, giving his fiery sword to Adam and Eve for warmth. Aziraphale is not punished, although his deeds mirror those of Prometheus in Greek mythology, who gave the gift of fire to the first humans and was severely punished in return. Aziraphale and Crowley's dilemma stems from not knowing if the correct thing to do is to follow orders or to act ethically. Thus, Aziraphale thinks he has done wrong by going against the will of God despite acting ethically, and Crowley thinks he has done right because his actions were morally right towards Adam and Eve, although they were at the request of Satan. From this, it is clear that from the very beginning, linking goodness with heaven and badness with hell is problematic. Good Omens discards the idea of good and evil altogether and focuses more on the combined result of the good and bad actions performed by heaven and hell. If morals don't play a role in their being, then there's no real difference between the two sides. For comparison, it is possible to look at another group of characters, the four riders of the apocalypse. They are personifications of certain aspects of humanity, representing three of the worst things humanity has inflicted upon itself: war, famine, and pollution, and its ultimate consequence, death. The riders represent a separate entity altogether from the likes of Aziraphale and Crowley. Early on in the novel, they share similarities. The four riders have also been among humans since their creation, and in their introductory paragraphs, they are described as human. Unlike Crowley and Aziraphale, however, their human identities are mere facets disguising what they truly are. Death himself states that the other three riders belong in the minds of man, and that he himself is creation's shadow, thereby linking them firmly to humanity. War, famine, and pollution are personifications of human characteristics, whereas angels and demons are physical creatures in the Good Omens universe. Their role is not to influence, they are the consequence of influence and of humanity's own folly. Therefore, when the apocalypse draws nearer, these human facets melt away, revealing their true nature, which is barely recognizably human, and consists of what humanity associates with each particular trait. While their actions are to the detriment of humanity, they do not have free will and cannot be identified as morally bad. At the climax of the novel, as Adam Young breaks free from the influences of hell, he decides that the best thing for humanity is the non-involvement of both heaven and hell. Even as the Metatron and Beelzebub suggest he just wants to rule the world by himself, he explains that the best thing for humanity is to be left alone. Crowley and Aziraphale come to the same realization shortly later. People knew the difference between right and wrong in the good old days, said Aziraphale dreamily. Well, yes, think about it. Yes, too much messing about. Adam chooses to let humanity be in control of itself rather than manipulate it either way. This attitude is the culmination of a development throughout Good Omens. At the beginning, he's a leader of his group of friends. As his powers grow beyond his friends, and as he becomes more aware of the world around him and the problems it faces, he inadvertently adjusts reality to suit himself, creating things that he feels should exist, such as Atlantis, and erasing things that he feels shouldn't, such as nuclear reactors. His powers and will to manipulate reality to meet his desires are at their highest as he delivers his monologue to his friends about the fantastic life they would lead if he were to be in control. But then a clear shift happens in his persona, and he abandons these plans as the last remnants of his demonic self is subdued. From then on, he strives to free humanity from divine and satanic influences, starting with the planned apocalypse. Realizing whose side he is on enables him to fight for that side's rights and demand its autonomy. His actions are benevolent towards humanity in a political sense, but in wanting to establish a self-governing humanity, Adam might better be described as amoral, having turned down the opportunity to influence either for good or bad. Having achieved a greater insight into the nature of the world, he abandons the religious doctrine in favor of a different moral stance, that of autonomy. Good Omens takes an interesting stance on ethics, whereby the capacity for moral decisions itself becomes a central theme in the narrative. It's the dividing factor between the two opposing factions, where those with free will have the ethical capacity to make their own decisions, and those without free will act in accordance with their superiors' plans. When discussing free will, one cannot help but mention its opposite, determinism, the theory that everything has been decided already. This also comes into play in Good Omens as the often mentioned ineffable plan, God's plan for everything that will happen. Heaven and hell go by what little they know of this plan, but as it turns out that the apocalypse will not take place as their great plan predicted, they falter, unable to deviate from it because they have no free will and cannot possibly make decisions on their own. Because of that, emissaries are sent to talk to Adam Young and convince him of following the plan. Crowley and Aziraphale, however, solve their problems by suggesting that the great plan can only be a tiny part of the overall ineffability. You can't be certain that what's happening right now isn't exactly right from an ineffable point of view. In the finale of the novel, Aziraphale and Crowley's reasoning goes further as they discuss the possibility of everything being predetermined. Maybe it's all part of one great, big, ineffable plan. All of it. You, me, him, everything. So at this point, determinism can be considered proven within the case of Good Omens, but it's still unclear how free will fits into this picture. Well, compatibilism is a view in philosophy that says free will and determinism can coexist. In simpler terms, it suggests that even if the universe is governed by fixed laws and everything is predetermined, we can still make choices freely. If you imagine you're playing a video game with set rules and limitations, within that game you still make choices like going left or right, attacking or retreating. In the same way, compatibilism argues that even if the world has fixed laws that determine what happens, you're still making real choices within those parameters. So according to compatibilism, you can be both determined by the universe's laws and still exercise free will. Balancing comedy with some of the more challenging questions, Good Omens tackles the moral implications of the apocalypse and the characters involved in it. Writing in a comedic style gives the authors the freedom to go further and doubt the benevolence of heaven as well as the intrinsic evilness of hell. As this story unfolds, the ethical and theological questions lead a reader to question biblical doctrines and the narrative it relies on in the beginning of the novel. At the culmination of the apocalypse, the story has evolved far enough from the biblical passages it's based on that events and characters can be deconstructed and re-examined according to literary theory and philosophy. This is why Good Omens is not a religious novel. It does not treat the religious text as irrefutable truth, but as a story and a prophecy that can be manipulated and expanded on. Although I struggle to enjoy comedy in written form, by shedding new light on old topics, Good Omens evokes questions about the biblical apocalypse, free will, fate, and many other subjects discussed in this video. This is a hallmark of good literature, be it a work of fantasy fiction or not. If you enjoyed this video, please like it to support it. This was Heads and Tails. Till next time.